Hello and welcome to 24 Panels Per Second. This is the comic book, movie and TV review podcast from the Comic Crush. This is what we're doing this week. A bit late, but, you know, here we go. Let's just bring on Liz. Hello.
Hello.
We're a bit late on this one, Liz. Normally we're a bit more timely than this, but we've... we got caught up in live stuff. How you doing?
Yeah, good.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter though. Normally we would issue people a warning at this point saying we're going to spoil this film for you. So please make sure you see the film before listening to this review. But it doesn't matter because Marvel waited 3 days before spoiling their own movie, which I thought was a fantastic bit of marketing.
I mean, the lid wasn't going to stay on it for very long. I think,
No, and I'm actually, in retrospect, I'm surprised it did stay on as long as it did. Given they did a bunch of special kind of fan screenings in sort of late April, which again, I don't really see the point of if you're trying to maintain a kind of reasonable amount of non-spoiler kind of behavior. But I guess they just didn't give a monkeys. I don't know. It's hard to say.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they were just trying to create buzz because I think they wanted people to go into the cinema and see it. And
yeah. And the tenor of things is very much, Marvel are back. This is kind of, we're going to talk about whether we feel that's the case. We're going to throw in our 2 cents and we'd love to hear from you guys in the comments or on the Comic Crush socials if you agree with that. But yeah, so Liz, I mean, going in, you had high expectations of this, right? You were kind of...
I did. I mean, I since they announced it, this is the one that I've been like kind of the most excited about,
What I'm curious as to what drove, and I'm not saying I wasn't, because I was really, once I saw the trailers and things, I was really looking forward to it. What drove that excitement for you, do you think?
I think it's that I am a sucker for this type of team. The team of sort of outcasts and villains and a bunch of jerks basically, who kind of have to reconcile who they are and work together. And I think that just the idea of that appeals to me a lot. And it was a bunch of characters that I was just really excited to see interact with each other. And yeah, I mean, I just had, from the word go, I just had this strong feeling that, this is something I'm going to really love.
Now, I mean, I kind of agree and disagree on the bunch of jerks things, because it within the team, we have one thief, one very, very highly trained killer, not counting Bucky Barnes, who sort of comes into the team a bit later. As we'll discuss in the review, and one genuine a-hole, yeah, like a genuine, which was interesting to see in that mix. I mean, we did a Thunderbolts predictions video a couple of weeks back, which some of you may or may not have seen, probably haven't seen. But do go back and take a look at that, and we'll kind of talk about how right or wrong we were as we get into this, if we can remember what we said in that video. But I from the get-go, I was really excited by this and really interested to see it and genuinely looking forward to it. I felt a bit kind of disappointed by Brave New World, as we both did, which you guys can check out the video for that or listen to the podcast. But neither of us were particularly moved by that film.
But I hadn't been particularly surprised by that.
No.
You know, I kind of had the feeling going in that, you know, I was going to find flaws with it.
Hmm.
And, you know, for various reasons, which we talked about on that podcast.
And another film that seemed like Marvel seemed to have shifted into this thing now where they're quite happily letting you know all the twists and turns
in the trailers, yeah, I suppose.
In the trailers and in the pre-publicity stuff. And I kind of want to go back to the days where there's at least some attempt at mystery, because I feel that Brave New World would have been not a better film, because the film is the film,
but a better received film.
A better received film and a better experience had so much of it just not been kind of teased or quite obvious. This also really, when you think about it, looking back on the film now, also pretty much gave away the entire game. Really,
I don't know that I agree with that.
Okay, we can talk about it. I don't feel, you know, like I was massively surprised with it. But, you know, we start with Yelena, who is, and this is key for the entire film, depressed. Like, Elena is in the pit of depression. And we see her at the beginning, you know, jumping off the world's tallest building, I believe it is. Or second tallest building, which she did herself several times. I think she did it a total of about 9 times, that jump. Now, again, my problem with that is that you see her jump off the building and then immediately there's a cut to, you know, a longer distance shot. And it just like it did kind of spoil that. Because I knew going in, oh, yeah, she did this stunt herself. This is great. But you don't get that sort of Tom Cruisian sense of wow and danger from that. And I don't know if that was purposeful, because they're you very rarely see in Marvel movies, oh, this super dangerous stunt done by the actor. Like, you don't really get that in Marvel. That's something that's almost exclusively in the realm of the Mission Impossible movies.
Here's the thing, though. I don't think it was necessary at all to feel that. No. Like, I feel like, you know, the point of, like, you know, maybe a Mission Impossible stunt like that is to, you know, feel that. I don't think that was the tone they were going for in that scene. I think what they were actually going for, they succeeded with, which was just her, you know, like metaphorically jumping off a building, committing suicide. And I felt like it hit that tone just right. You know.
And we should warn, like, if, you know, I mean, there is a lot of that in the movie, and there's going to be a lot of talk about those subjects in the review. So if you are, I may actually try and put up some of the like kind of helpline numbers, because I feel that this movie really kind of went for it as far as that subject matter is concerned.
Yeah.
And we hear her kind of narrating that her life is basically, you know, she's become disappointed in her own existence, really, because she's out there doing these jobs for the government, for Val, shutting down all these secret operations that Val is littered across the globe. And doing it going through the motions, you know. Yeah. And doing it quite violently, and we do get a lovely kind of callback to 2 things, really. One is I don't know if you've ever seen the film Old Boy. Yeah. So there's a lovely fight in not lovely. There's a fight in the film Old Boy that's done all from a kind of side-on view in a corridor, with the wall kind of collapsed outwards, so you'd be able to see what's going on in this fight. And it really uses the scope of the width of the camera lens beautifully. And there's a kind of callback to that with this sort of overhead fight. You see Yelena taking down these guys one by one. And what that called back to me was actually the scene in Iron Man 2 when they introduced Natasha.
You know, it's very similar to that, like, kind of hallway fight scene where she's taking out all the, you know, various agents. And you see, like, you know, kind of a perspective from above, and
yeah, I actually forgot about that. You're completely right. Yeah. And then
that is something I'm going to kind of touch on, you know, as we go through. I feel like they're, you know, and one of the things that I really loved about this film, and, you know, thought about in retrospect, is how many callbacks there are to different moments in different Avengers films.
Yeah.
Which, of course, you know, we find out at the end is, you know, is what this film is. Yeah.
And also, I also like the fact that she's discussing this with this guy she's got tied up, because that actually sent me back to the post-credit stinger of Iron Man 3, where
he's talking to Banner. Yeah, you find out that he's been talking to Bruce Banner the whole time, which is so funny.
That really made me kind of think of that, and I liked that.
And it's done very, like, there's so many moments like that when you think about this film, and it's all done with so much subtlety that you only really notice it in retrospect.
Yeah, I think it's quite nicely played. So we learn that Yelena is shutting down all these things for Val. There's some massively secret operation that's alluded to. I mean, we kind of all guessed what that was going in, and you know, we're then intercut with Val at a kind of Senate hearing to remove her from the post of which I didn't even know she had. She's running the CIA, and she's in the middle of a congressional hearing to effectively remove her from that post for corruption and for various other things. We never actually really did they actually say what her crimes were? Like, what? I can't.
They're looking for evidence that she. I can't remember now. You know, I watched it. Well, I saw it twice. Yeah, sure I did, but that was last week. You know, it's all a little fuzzy now. But you know, they suspect her of a number of, you know, offenses, and you know, and something that I didn't actually, you know, like realize right away, and something that, like, I don't think they made clear. I think this is one of the things in the film that I think that they could have made more obvious, and was, you know, that sort of the reason that Bucky's even there, the reason he's even, you know, part of, you know, he's taken this congressional position is essentially to kind of spy on her, essentially to.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. I mean, he's kind of doing that as a. I just took that as him just doing that
because it just made no sense. It was like, it didn't make any sense, you know, that you know, it's like when they bring that up in Captain America: Brave New World, it's like it comes out of left field completely. It's like I you know, I don't understand.
And in a way, it does make sense that he's the congressman for Brooklyn, and I kind of like that element of it.
Yeah.
And
but he gets fired pretty, you know, pretty quickly. You know, he's not very good at it at all. They make it very clear.
And apparently this was a Feige thing. This was his idea. Yeah. I don't know what purpose he was trying to serve with that.
I mean, I think maybe there was a draft where, you know, it made a lot more sense. And they explain really, like, why he's there, that it is like to spy on Val, that it is, you know, he has his reasons beyond just, you know, wanting to become a congressman, which doesn't fit with his character at all and has no basis in the comics. You know,
and I think it kind of gets into something I do want to. I'm not sure what the appropriate point to get into this is, but something I do want to talk about, which is structure of the film and length, because I feel this film could have actually done with being 15 minutes longer.
Okay.
Which is very rare for me to say, because normally I just want to get in and get out. But and a lot of the time Marvel movies are kind of I feel overlong. And in fact, a lot of movies are just overlong.
Okay, interesting. I like, I'll because I didn't feel that, but I'd be curious to hear, your reasons and like certainly something like that. What I just mentioned, it's like, oh, okay, that, I wouldn't have minded having at least a little bit of exposition telling me, this is, the reason for that, and explaining that a little bit better.
Yeah, and I feel that's what it could have done is a bit of padding and a bit more Bucky as a congressman in terms of trying to serve his constituents and trying to, do stuff. Just a little bit of something.
Because I think the only thing you really see, and the only thing you're really given as an audience member, to see like, oh, okay, so why is he doing it? He's not very good at it. They have him being interviewed and he says the word worrying like 5 times over the course of 2 sentences, so it's like,
which
okay.
I liked that it was a entirely predictable moment, the moment they come up and ask him the question, and you can tell he's kind of like
inept, like he's just inept at, because he's not Steve, he's not this charismatic, or Sam. He's not this charismatic figure, he's not like a public speaker.
Also, it's kind of, I find it completely almost nonsense that a man who had killed people for the Russians would be
right.
Even though there are plenty of politicians who've probably worked in some capacity for the services,
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, a lot of veterans and stuff, and, who knows what they've done. So,
but I find it completely sort of nonsensical that this man they know was a Russian agent, a brainwashed Russian agent, would ever kind of be allowed such. Sorry, I would have found that surprising a couple of years ago.
Right. Exactly.
Now,
so,
not so much.
Right.
There
you go.
So maybe it was a comment on that. I don't know. But I found it kind of it could have done with a little breathing room. And it's one of the interesting things about the film structurally is that when you step back and look at it, the film's only made up of about 4 sequences, and those 4 sequences are all set in one location, each one.
Yeah.
And that's that is very, very strange for a Marvel movie, because normally you would zip around. I mean, let's be clear, when you watch these movies, there's no like I always think of Age of Ultron when they were doing that stuff in Korea, I think it's supposed to be, and there's no kind of awareness that would be that could be anywhere. That could be San Francisco, Chinatown. It doesn't matter,
right?
Almost, and it kind of is a nonsensical nod to and again, I think the Mission Impossible films do a better job of at least having some kind of cultural awareness and knowledge there, and these don't. They could be set anywhere,
right? And I think it's not really the point necessarily.
No, but I just feel like, when you're zipping around so much, you kind of need to orientate people, and one of the ways you do it is through little cultural things. But there's no real attempt at that in Marvel,
no.
and that's fine. That's not what you're there for, maybe. But this is only set in like 4 places, and most of those are stateside. And
there's a sequence in the beginning that's in Malaysia, but it could be anywhere.
Yeah, it could be anywhere. Yeah, and that importantly ties into something that comes up later on. But I found it really interesting when I sat back and thought, it's like, oh, hold on, we've only been here, and we're also at this party in Washington or New York. I can't remember where the party was taking place. But we're also in the mountains somewhere, with Yelena and everyone else turning up to kill each other. And then we're in the desert, and then we're back in the city at the Avengers Tower, and then we're on the street, and that's it. And there's only 4 places to really go.
Well, yeah, and what? I actually think that kind of speaks to, what the point of this movie is that it's really character driven. You know, all of those sequences took place, you know, kind of over the course of large chunks of the film. When you think about, you know, that scene in the vault, that takes up like, you know, a quarter of the film at least. And it's like, you know, but it's all about, you know, what's going on with them as people and not about what they're doing, you know, to you know, be zipping around through locations. You know, there's like the, you know, a 10-minute walk scene while they're walking, you know, up that long tunnel, you know, to escape. It's, you know, it's all about the interdynamics between them.
And I was actually really impressed by that, because I felt this is something to what I was, you know, remember we did another video you can find on the channel, folks, if you care to, is we did a sort of state of the MCU kind of catch up on where we were just before like the end of last year. So before Brave New World had come out, before this had come out, we looked at all the trailers for the upcoming movies. And one of the things I kind of said I really wanted was smaller films. Now this still feels like a fairly big movie in a lot of ways, but at the same time, again, when you step back from it and look at it structurally and look at the beats, it's like it really isn't. It doesn't feel like a huge film. Apparently more of this was done in camera than any other Marvel movie. So a lot of it was shot on actual places. Yes, there was some stage work, I think. Obviously there's some stage work because you know the type of sets you're getting and stuff. But that kind of the ending for me, and I don't want to jump to the ending and give anything away, but the stuff on the street in New York felt really like a stage. That was where I kind of was like, oh yeah, you can kind of see this. This is just a particularly well lit stage, or it felt like it, at least. And that was like one negative I kind of took away from it, but it wasn't this is spoiling the movie for me negative. It's just like, this is a negative in the moment. But yeah, we have the main characters turn up to kill each other. So we have Taskmaster, we have Ghost from Ant-Man and Wasp.
Yeah.
I always forget that it's the second Ant-Man she's in.
Yeah, because Yellow Jacket's the first.
Yeah. We have Yelena and we have John
US
Walker.
agent,
yeah, the US agent. What's interesting about it is you are dealing with 4 characters there who are all depressed.
Right.
They
I mean,
are
and
all
that's
suffering from.
Yeah, and that's that I think is like, you know, is the metaphor in this movie, you know, the void and, you know, and depression.
Yeah.
And I think I think it's all done really beautifully, and like we'll talk about that. But yeah, they are all depressed people. You know, and Yelena, you know, is really your kind of central character in this movie.
Yes.
But they're all experiencing, you know, this same, you know, emptiness and brokenness and, you know, sense of being alone in the world.
And I mean, I understand there was a version of the movie where Walker was going to be the villain. I don't know how they would have swung that, but apparently there was a draft where Walker was the villain. Interestingly, we do have, you know, following on from our sort of predictions video, we do have Taskmaster in probably one of the most pointless.
Right. And like, I'm still frustrated because, you know, I'm still frustrated that didn't turn out to be like a reveal. You know, because I thought that, like, you know, when the way they set it up in the movie, I was like, oh, okay, well, it really feels like that, you know, is what they're going to do here. Because otherwise, what's the point? And as it turns out, it was just, what's the point? You know?
Yeah.
Because, you know, I theorized that, like, you know, behind the mask, like, you know, they could have had, you know, kill her off early in the film, but then have, you know, somebody like Zemo or even Melina turn up later underneath that mask and, you know, sort of be revealed to, you know, sort of have been pulling the strings to some extent or other. And they didn't do that.
And I also understand there was a draft where Zemo would have turned up at some point.
Yeah, in a post-credit scene.
I mean, I found it a bit wasteful, just because when you look at the end of Black Widow, she's sort of welcomed into this group of women who have to then go and find themselves and find their own lives outside of this structure that's been imposed on them by a man. You know, they've all lived in this kind of weird structure all their lives, and they're free of that now, and you know, so is she, and it's even more poignant for her because it's her dad, and then bang, she's dead in
just
a couple of
one,
minutes.
Yeah, and like, I mean, that character, she held a lot of significance for Natasha, like, sort of, that was a moment of, catharsis for Natasha, that, she hadn't actually killed her, and she, in fact gets to sort of set her free. And I thought it was kind of a waste. And I feel like, I've talked about this movie, to a number of people at this point, and I felt like there was kind of a consensus that people were like, oh yeah, that just kind of felt like a shame. They could have done something interesting with that character. And, I feel that too. I thought, oh, well, like if they were going to kill her off, I would have liked there to be like a reason, like, oh, make it like something kind of cool, like, like a reveal of another character.
I think the point of it is that at the time we kind of can guess, we know what John Walker's gone through. We definitely know what Yelena's gone through. But they needed to give Ghost some guilt and some weight.
Do you think that's it?
I think that's partly it. It does smack to me of a late stage rewrite, because I would have really liked to have seen her character. She gets one line in the movie.
Yeah.
One line. And it's just like, I would have liked to have seen her character interact with the others.
I mean, what they've sort of said, like, there has been, I think the director sort of said, oh, well, we chose to do that to sort of raise the stakes, like, to make it clear that anyone could die at any moment. But, I don't think it succeeds in doing that, because we don't care about her at that point. She, as you say, she gets one line. And, I guess if you were going to have taken anything from it, there's a line that Yelena delivers at some point, sort of saying, she lived a hard life, she killed people and then she died, and that's it. And that's her whole legacy. And that could be Yelena,
Yeah. Yeah. I still feel annoyed about it, and I reserve the right to feel annoyed about it. But, obviously the team learn that they're there to kill each other. And I liked that aspect of it. And of course, into this, we have Bob, who just appears out of nowhere, and everyone thinks kind of, how did this guy get in here? The savvy members of the audience, or just about anyone, will know that, of course, that he was already there. He's already he is the kind of thing they're there to destroy. Well, he isn't.
Well, he's the thing. He's the evidence that they're there to cover up.
Yeah.
And this is actually, what when we were talking about Val and what the Senate, was trying to prove to impeach her, was like, oh, that you've been experimenting, you've been conducting these, experiments, and, they don't, I think they don't know exactly what she's doing, but they know it's, very dangerous stuff. And, what it is that she's been trying to create her own, superhero in a bottle.
Yeah, and it's very interesting that what we're kind of presented with is a Superman analog, almost, because you don't, again, that's not really Marvel's remit. That's not what they do. Obviously, Superman is of great importance to comic books, being the very first, as it were. And we get this guy who can, who's incredibly strong. He's bulletproof. He can fly. And I think it's kind of interesting that it's this character now, as we're about to have Superman come out in July.
Right. I mean, the Sentry, of course, is a character with a really interesting origin. But you know, he's essentially like, you know, what if Superman was mentally ill and, you know, equal parts, you know, sort of a threat as he is a hero, and he's unstable, and he's actually, you know, I mean, he's actually a far more similar in origin to Homelander, you know, from The Boys, whose
Very
character
true, yeah.
who was invented years after both, you know, many years after Superman, but also years after the Sentry was created. But, you know, the origin is that he was, you know, essentially, you know, built, you know, like built to become a weapon, and, you know, developed in the test tube and experimented on, and, you know, trained to be what he is, and turns into a monster, which is kind of, you know, what happens with the Sentry, but to a different, you know, different extent.
And also, like, you get some wonderful stuff. Like, as you said, you get the lift shaft stuff where they're kind of trying to climb up this lift shaft, and it's interesting because looking at the stuff with John Walker there, he becomes the least, you know, no one knows Bob, but John Walker becomes the least trusted of all those characters. And I wonder if part of that is because he's wearing the most, he's wearing the, you know, effectively wearing the skin and uniform of the most trusted character in the MCU.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting too, you know, I mean, they have the moment where, you know, I mean, he's you know, of all of them, he's the, you know, the real jerk of the bunch. And like Bob even, you know, comments, like, you know, he just starts laughing and he's like, oh, like, you know, I just think it's funny, like, you're Captain America, but you're such an asshole.
Yeah. And also you know, someone, I think it's Ghost, asked him, didn't you flat out murder someone on like you murdered an innocent person? And his response is fascinating because he doesn't show remorse for that.
No,
he just goes, well, you know, innocent, like, how can we be sure? Like, and that is absolutely fascinating, and that's fascinating now because I think that speaks to it definitely speaks to American governmental and foreign policy right now, especially when we look at what's going on politically. I think it also speaks to an interesting part of the culture, which is incel culture. Like, I think that they kind of, all those characters kind of represent different facets of modern societal, what's the word I'm looking for? Modern societal dissent, almost. And by dissent, I mean descent as a downward path, not dissent as you know, political dissent. But I think those characters were there to kind of represent different aspects of what young people are going through right now. Although I think Walker's kind of the oldest of the bunch.
And Walker, you know, I mean, he's he you know, you talked about the uniform and everything. I think it was very interesting. You know, you see him, you know, he's in the uniform, but the uniform's all beat up and muted and destroyed, and the shield that he's carrying is all messed up, and, you know, like, none of it is this bright, you know, Captain America shiny uniform. It's all drab, it's all, you know, weathered, and, you know, he looks like, you know, this really down on his luck Captain America.
Yeah, and that kind of speaks to the rest of the film, because one of the problems I had with the film was that and I was sitting there thinking, you know, I'm so easily distracted. Even when I'm watching something, my mind will kind of start going doink, you know. So I'm sitting there watching it, and I'm like, man, where are the colours? Like,
oh, dude, like, Paul, that's the point. That's the point.
No. I get that. I get that. I'm not an idiot. I understand what the thematic underlay of the film is. But I was thinking about comic book films in general, and how you can't really ever get the colours that you would see in comic books. and sometimes with good reason, because it's got to look like a movie, not a comic. But and I think that's one of the things that I always find is slightly missing from comic book movies is you can't necessarily get what the art does very well. And it also got me thinking about a lot of the fight sequences of the movie, and this kind of carried on right the way to the end for me.
Okay.
Which was they're not dynamic enough. They're all done. They're all done with the camera kind of way back here, and it's watching things happen, but it's not getting in there. And it's just like what I really wanted from this was the camera to get in there and move with the punches and really move with it, especially when we see that character in full bloom later on. But I kind of those were the kind of negative points.
Okay, all right. Well, so I'll just jump in and completely
tell me why I'm wrong.
You. So the colors, it's obvious. I mean, the whole.
No, I get Liz. I get
okay,
why.
But you said that it bothered you about the movie, and it's
no. Sorry, because... I want to be very specific. It bothered me. It bothers me about these types of movies in general. Is I don't think we're getting enough pop and enough pizzazz, and I think there are parts of this movie that could have done with a bit more pizzazz to make the eventual kind of darkness that comes all the more kind of accentuated.
But I would argue that the whole first 2/3 at least, if not 75% of the film, is meant to have that muted tone in it's metaphorical. It's they are depressed. The color has been sucked out of their lives. That is and
I agree.
by the end of the film, those tones brighten up significantly when they become when they all join together and become sort of a team, and they all learn to lean on each other. All of a sudden, the actual colors of the film go bright and so that's I would say that was a thematic choice that worked, and you're also not going to get in one of these Marvel films that is is trying to recreate the comics, but in a way that actually feels authentic in a real world quote unquote setting. You're not going to have you're like this bright costume. You're gonna have something that looks like it could be grounded in real worldedness. So and then to speak to the fight scenes, I thought the action sequences in this were fantastic. I thought that some of my favorites. I thought the scene where Bucky shows up on the motorbike, sort of Terminator 2 style. I thought that was fantastic. Just the the vehicles flipping over and him on the motor. It was fist pumping, awesome action scene. And then
they were fun. I feel like they were fun sequences. That isn't my problem. Yes, I was having fun.
I thought that I felt immersed in them when you have that scene near the end where Yelena's trying to get to Bob and she's flipping over all all the furniture that's flying back at her. You feel like you're right inside that. I
don't know. Yeah, I don't feel like I was inside it. Again, I liked looking at it. I really didn't like the stuff. I mean, we'll get to it, I guess. But with Bob in the Avengers Tower, that was incredibly badly staged. But yeah, overall,
I love the action scenes. I have to say I really enjoyed them, and I thought to myself, oh yeah,
I'll certainly agree with you with the Bucky sequence. That was great.
Right.
That was fun. But I think it's fun because of the characters. It's not necessarily fun because of the way it's shot. I think it's fun because of the dynamics that are going on there. I like that stuff. But also what the film gives us is, we get out of this kind of death trap mountain base. And once we're out in the air, of course, they find that they've got to go right back in because they're going to get taken out by a SWAT team. And there's a great little moment with Val and what's the name of the guy who's running her SWAT team, her own personal SWAT
Oh,
team.
I like Holt or something like that. I can't remember what his name
and
is.
I thought that was great, where she tells him, right, we've got to go non-lethal on this, and he's really, really upset. And
yeah.
she asks him, what are you upset about? And he's like, because we've spent ages preparing for lethal. And that is, in a way, that's Yelena. That's Yelena now having to move to a, you know, she's going inside that building. She's going through the same thing. She's come there prepared to kill, just as they all have. And they now all have to switch to non-lethal and to a kind of protection mode, which we find out, you know, all along that Bob doesn't really need.
Right, which actually, and Yelena is the one who steps up to do that, you know, like unasked, she's, you know, you stay behind me, Bob. And like the whole time he's like, what can I do? What can I do? And, you know, she's like, stand behind me, don't do anything, you know, and she, you know, sort of forms this bond with Bob, in just that she's trying to keep him alive. And she just resigns herself to it right away, that she's going to be his protector, you know, it's none of the others really, you know, care whether he lives or dies. And
and I think that is kind of really interesting, because had she not had that conversation with Alexei shortly before that moment, that would have been that wouldn't have been the case, I think.
Yeah,
where he tells her, you know, the best part of my life was being the hero. Right. And the higher calling of it, and that's fantastic. And I feel that conversation makes a big difference to her outlook for the rest of the movie. And I love that scene as well. That's a funny scene. Our mutual friend Paul Taylor messaged me just the other day to remind me about Joker 2. That we still haven't seen.
Yeah, I know. I like Paul actually sent me a message. Paul, if you're listening to this, I'm so sorry that I haven't replied to you yet. Yeah, I owe him a message back. You know, because he did message me about, mentioned Joker 2, I think, and also was giving me his thoughts on Brave New World. You know, which I think, you know, he wasn't crazy about either.
He actually felt that us agreeing with each other on Brave New World was some sort of harbinger of the apocalypse. Because not only did he agree with what we said, we agreed with each other.
I know, yeah.
So I'm sure he'd be pleased to see this one, to find us having minor disagreements. But he was saying that he really doesn't like the kind of very broad humor that Alexei brings to it, that David Harbour brings to it. And I was like, but that's the stuff I'm there for, you know. Kind of, that's
because I mean, he provides a lot of comic relief, and but with like all this heart behind it, you know, and the relationship between him and Yelena is really sweet to watch, and you feel this genuine love between them, and also just but that, you know, but the character that he sort of, you know, he's playing, that is, you know, he is this caricature almost, you know, like in that he's just, you know, he keeps, you know, sort of bumbling around. But it led to some of the funniest moments of the film, like, you know, when they do escape and they do finally make it out into the desert. That was like, you know, I was just dying laughing when he shows up in the limo, and she's just like, oh, like, you know, no, you know, like just so cringing about her dad showing up and embarrassing her.
It's completely kind of ineffectual at that point, because they've escaped.
And he's like, don't go in the vault.
Yeah. The vault that they've just spent the night in.
Right. Like hours too late.
One thing I do want to bring up about that whole thing is the beautiful way, the beatific kind of, I don't know how to describe it really, but the emotion that comes through when Bob finds out that he can fly, and that is something that interestingly is again missing from a lot of Marvel movies. I find is a character's own awe of what they can do, and also the audience's awe at what they can do. We've become very jaded as an audience. And I feel what was interesting about this was how earnest it was in those moments.
Yeah, I thought that Bob was a real breath of fresh air as a character, you know, because he is this innocent, and he's learning, as the audience are learning how massively powerful he is. And I would agree, we haven't really felt that in a while, in the MCU.
Yeah, and I think that there was something really beautiful in that moment, and also again you get that callback to the first Iron Man film where he kind of ascends, and then it can only go so far. Yeah. And I quite liked that aspect of it as well.
Yeah, we haven't really touched on Sentry much, like, as a character, but I thought that I thought it was extremely well done. They've got this character with this really bizarre origin in the comics. I mean, if you know the whole Sentry origin story in the comics, it's it's very convoluted in a way. That he was introduced as this character who had been this kind of golden age old school hero that had been all forgotten about, and Wizard magazine ran an article purporting that it had been a character created by Stan Lee years and years ago, but had been forgotten about, and
something that would not be possible today.
No, it would not be possible today.
As indeed the origin of Thunderbolts would not be possible today,
right?
Because they start off as a new set of characters coming in at the end of Onslaught, where, as far as the readers knew at the time, all the major Marvel characters had been killed. So Thor was gone, the FF were gone, Cap was gone, Iron Man was gone, and they were for all intents and purposes dead. And then you have this very, very, because it was late 97, right?
Yeah.
Very 90s team
turn up. Yep. And you don't know who any of them are, but they're all like show up. They're very heroic. Yeah. They save the day. And then end
of the first issue, just like Marvel, spoiling everything as quick as possible, it's revealed that they're the masters of evil. And that's something the movie couldn't, you could not have pulled that off in the movie.
I think that they could have done it to an extent. I still argue that, if they had had followed through with this twist, on Zemo being sort of, the mastermind of it, and I feel like they could have done something similar, but I don't think that's what they were trying to do. No. I think that I think they were going at it a different way,
And also, what's interesting about Thunderbolts in the comics is. Now, I'm only sort of coming towards the end of the first bunch of Thunderbolts stories. So I think it covers the volume I've got, covers their early appearances in Marvel Team Up and stuff like that. And Thunderbolts 1 to 5 is that they start to feel the benefits of being heroes. So they're bad people who decide they want to be good. And that is Thunderbolts. That is the Thunderbolts movie, yeah. Right. Bad people who want to be
better than they are, and who help each other be better than they are. And there are some calls, some nods to the original Thunderbolts team. The character of Mel, who is Val's assistant in the film, there is clearly a nod to Songbird.
Yeah, and one of the things we talked about in the kind of predictions video was, will she be playing
Songbird? Yeah, which she doesn't. But they do have, if you notice, the necklace that she's wearing in the film has a little songbird on it. So it is, because they, the only inference that she might be this character previously was that her name is Mel, and the character, of Songbird is, is called Melanie,
And again, a character who is bad because she is completely complicit in what Val is doing.
Yeah.
And is kind of, carrying out her orders.
I mean, she does it a little more nervously than Val does. There's the moment when, Val hands the tablet and says, okay, we'll kill them all now. And she's like, oh, do I have to? And Val's like, oh, for Christ's sake, I'll do it,
And yeah, but again, bad person who wants to be good. Or a person who's certainly doing bad things and wants to be good. Yeah, and like I say, Bob, fascinating character who we find out was kind of backpacking around Malaysia and then kind of didn't he
Wound up,
answer an ad?
yeah, saying that it can make you a better person. And again, that's that same theme. Somebody who, he acknowledges that he had been, sort of a screw up. He was on meth, and which, is, when you look at the character of the Sentry, the original Sentry story that Paul Jenkins wrote, there's it alludes to that the fact that he's like an alcoholic. In that he's got addiction problems, and in this they kind of flip it around a little bit, but you find out he's got addiction problems. He's leading this aimless sort of screwed up life, and he wants to be a better person, and that's why he signs up for this study, which Val herself says, oh well, none of those test subjects were meant to survive. This was just us experimenting, and none of them were actually expected to be the chosen one. And so the fact that one of them did survive, but he's like a liability,
much like the Thunderbolts themselves,
right?
None of them were meant to fight. And also, here's another issue I had was I felt in retrospect, I just thought about this today, that would have made it an interesting opening to the movie. Bob kind of being plucked off the street to take part in marriage, or wandering around, and it would have completely discombobulated the audience for a few minutes. Because you would have been, how is this guy going to connect had he not been in the trailers? You know what I mean? And I actually felt that I would have liked to have seen that at the beginning of the movie.
I don't think I needed that at all. I think like having Bob show up and have, no explanation as to who he is and why he's there, and have it revealed over the course of the film. I thought that was more satisfying, than needing any explanation beforehand. I'm just saying.
I didn't want an explanation. What I'm trying to get at is, I feel like a much more evocative and interesting opening to the picture would have been this guy backpacking across Malaysia and then answering an ad.
I can't imagine a more evocative and emotional opening of the film than Yelena. Like, and maybe. And I thought that perfectly set up the tone of the film, and what they were trying to say with the film is the scene with her saying there's something wrong with her and dropping off the building. That's completely the perfect opening.
I don't know, because I think that in a way it's as much Bob's story as it is Yelena's.
Sure, but it's like I felt more enjoyment watching his story reveal itself over the course of the film than I would have from being given any idea or at all who he was or what he was doing or why. I didn't need it.
This is interesting, folks, because what's happening now is we both really like the movie, but we're disagreeing about how we like the movie and what we liked about it. So even this we've managed to turn into a fight. I hope you're enjoying this. So yeah, and also one of the things I liked about this is you get to see the first time what Bob's ability and this void thing. Now I'm not clear. Did he have some sort of latent metahuman ability before they did experiments on him, or is that a result of the?
I think it's just a result of the the experiments that they did on him.
Because it kind of it's called the void. Does anyone ever call it the void?
Well, yeah. And I haven't read the original comic in years and years.
Yeah.
But in that the void is described as his arch enemy. And you spend the story thinking that the void is this other character that, he's going to have to defeat, like his evil arch nemesis. But then, the reveal is that actually he is the void. The void is, his alter ego.
Okay. And I quite like this thing where he's able to kind of pull people into that, depression space. But also enter into theirs, because we see Yelena's, this kind of core moment. of this turning point in her life, where she was kind of forced to lure her best friend out into the forest, and have her assassinated. And that kind of reminded me of what they put I think it's like the SAS through. They make them, on the first day of training, they give them a rabbit. Do you know about this? So they give them a rabbit, and they've got to care for and tend to that rabbit. And then a few days in, they have to kill it.
Well, that's like in the Kingsman film. They do, they have the same thing, but with the puppies, or
and it's. I kind of liked seeing that moment of Yelena's life, and it's a moment we keep going back to. And Bob, of course, has his own depression space where he, that goes through all the moments in his life. Quite nastily, it's kind of indicated and hinted that he was abused, like, because there's stuff with his dad, and we know his dad beat him up and beat his mum, but there's something he starts to say about his dad, and then it's left. And it just doesn't get said. And your mind literally goes insane at that point, because you're kind of, oh God,
you're filling in the blanks with something.
I am really surprised that they went as far as they did with that stuff.
Which, it's only very, like, it's alluded to. And if you want to read into it, it's there. But
maybe it's a problem with me, because that's where my mind went. I was like, it's like, that's a bit. And I was quite shocked that they went as far with it as they did. And of course, we see Walker's sort of depression space where, he's no longer paying attention to his wife and child. He's not managing that well because of the act he's committed, which again makes the fact that he won't apologize for that.
Well, yeah, it's
any remorse,
and he also wouldn't even acknowledge that his wife and kid had left him. He sort of purported himself to be, I'm this great family man, and I have a wife and kid who loves me, and I'm the former Captain America, and he's still talking about himself like he's, I'm like this great guy that everyone respects, when it's like he himself knows deep down that none of those things are true.
Yeah. And I found him really kind of, his journey was quite interesting, and I would like to see more of Wyatt Russell. And I know they're all back for Doomsday and things like that. And actually, I tell you, who really surprised me in this movie was Hannah John Kamen. I thought she was really good. She was great. Yeah. And again, it's interesting. I think it is a kind of comment on incel culture in a way, because you notice it's the women that dismiss him, and his wife doesn't want anything to do with him, as far as we know, and the two very strong women are the least kind of interested in listening to his bullshit, and that I found kind of really interesting and sort of really spoke to me about what was kind of going on in the undercurrents there. And I think it is a comment on kind of incel culture and
this film, as much as it was an ensemble film, it was really kind of a female-led film, with Yelena as, really the main character.
And Val and Hannah John Kamen. Yeah. And I feel like she's the character we got to know the least, and I would like to have seen more scenes with her.
Yeah, I would agree, but I think all the scenes she was in, were really enjoyable to watch, and she proves herself twice over by, she could have left and abandoned them, but she chooses to come back and and help them, escape the vault, and get free of the base, by stealing the truck,
completely. And I really kind of liked all that stuff. I think they're great. They're a great team together. Alexei kind of comes in later as you say, the bumbling sort of
dad. Yeah, like the embarrassing dad,
Yeah. And it's kind of fascinating that Bucky manages to subdue them all.
Well, it's like, oh yeah, actually, that I could completely buy that, which was hilarious.
So I kind of really liked that stuff. It's fascinating with Val. It's because she of course has her own depression space, which we see later on in the film, her own void. But what's interesting with Val is she's divorced herself from that completely. She does not try to become a better person in any way.
No, and she really is like, like truly villainous, and it's fun to watch. And her relationship to Bob is very interesting. It's obviously she's playing sort of the role that Norman Osborn played in the comics, where he was the one who was whispering in Bob's ear and saying, "Oh, I'm the only one who understands you. I'm the only one who cares, and you're going to do this for me, and and I'll take care of you." And obviously they didn't get as much time to explore that relationship, in this film, and the way that kind of flips around pretty quickly is also kind of fun to watch, because she thinks that he's going to be under her thumb.
Do you know, remarkably, what it really reminded me of, and I'm sure this will not please fans of Alan Moore, but what it really reminded me of was Miracle Man.
Sure.
Because it's that entire moment where the god realizes, yeah, I'm a god, and I don't like.
I don't
why
need
would
you.
I even listen to you?
Right.
Why would I even consider anything you've got to say?
Yeah.
And I feel that was in that moment. Is he Bob or is he the Void? Because that's that kind of, because it's kind of turning against this sort of parental figure who wants him to do terrible things. But at the same time, is that a kind of, was it a power display or was it a reach for kind of freedom? And I found that scene quite interesting in what it was sort of starting to explore.
Right. That, it's like Bob, he didn't want to kill, Yelena, and, and the others who had helped him, like, and he's like, they're not a threat to me. Why would I kill them?
Yeah. And that's a key thing. Also, a key thing about society now, when you look at it and in the way that certain groups are being treated. I'm not going to say who or what, because but we know what groups we're talking about, because they're not a threat to anyone. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, great. Let's just oppress. Let's oppress. And there's simply no reason to do it.
Right. And with her, she doesn't even give any other reason than because I told you to, and you have to listen to me.
And that's the thing, is she can't back up what she really wants.
And to be fair, Bob was like, not what she would have chosen. Like she this her the idea of hers, probably she would have had, all sorts of time to impose herself as like the authority figure, to this superhero that she was going to use to control the world. And she didn't get to do that with Bob because he was, just the byproduct of, what she thought was a failed experiment.
He was the kind of happy accident. And I kind of really like the fact that we have to kind of go in deep into that, and Yelena chooses to kind of face the issue, and it isn't done with a big punch up, which I quite like. I mean, yes, there is some violence, there is a fight, but
actually it's like, it's a, like she brings him down by, hugging him and showing him that he's not alone. And, I thought that was like, I got choked up a couple of times in the film. And that was one of the times totally. I got choked up.
Me too. I found it really hit something in me. And having gone through, like, in my own life, a ton of depression, which I still go through, but I've got a lot better at dealing with it. And gone through, some thoughts that are probably a bit grim. I found the movie really spoke to me in that way.
Yeah.
And I hats off to them for doing that.
Right. You know, I mean, I can't think of a recent Marvel film that has had such a strong and, like, you know, sort of hard-hitting, you know, emotional theme running through it.
And it's an interesting thing because Marvel's new remit. So there's an article in the Wall Street Journal recently, and Marvel's new remit apparently is Disney wants less.
Good.
And we want you to make less stuff and make it better.
Right.
But I feel that this film is only possible, and this kind of subject, getting into this subject matter in their first big movie out of the summer, because they've got more than one, of course. Their first big movie out of the summer is only possible because they've got so many things coming out this year. So one of those things can take the risk. And it's interesting that they picked this film to take the risk. Like one of those films can be about a more troubling set of subjects, and one of those films can be a bit kind of more brave, because you won't see that type of bravery in Fantastic Four. Like, I don't think.
I don't.
And you certainly didn't see it in, although the movie that should have been a bit braver was Brave New World.
Ironically, yeah.
Yeah. But I suspect that this one coming out post Trump inauguration and that one coming out before probably had something, or being made and set and done, you know, right before was probably something to do with that. And this is perhaps the film that they had a bit more time and space to pour some of that stuff into.
Well, I think you know, like the differences between those two films are just, you know, a lot of the ingredients that went into them. Like the Captain America film, they were going to have to do a Sam Wilson Captain America film, and they were going to have to do it, you know, within a certain time frame. And they just, you know, it seemed rushed and cobbled together, you know, whereas this one, I think, you know, they kind of went into it with like a pretty strong vision of, you know, what kind of story it was going to be. And that it also wouldn't be as much of a, you know, sort of, it could exist a little bit outside of the mainstream Marvel, you know? Yeah,
definitely. Given the team and kind of the places where we'd found those guys initially. Yeah.
But I think that, you know, and I hope that that's the case. I hope that they take a less is more approach, you know, kind of in the coming years, and put out maybe 2 films a year, if that, and, you know, one TV show.
Well, Jake Schreier, who is the director of this, who'd done, so he'd previously done Paper Towns, which is quite small independent movie with I forget who the male lead, isn't it? But it's sort of quite notable for Cara Delevingne's first kind of big acting role. And I feel like the gap between Cara Delevingne and Florence Pugh is quite short, you know what I mean? And then there's also he did a film called Robot and Frank, which is
that's a great film. Yeah,
a movie that kind of purports to be about one thing and actually turns out to be about another. And that
was a very emotionally kind of like, you know, moving film,
and a terrific movie. I really enjoyed that film.
I haven't seen Paper Towns, but
you're not missing a ton. It's not an amazing
Frank was
movie,
great.
It's a fun little movie. I think it's based on a novel, like a YA novel maybe, but it's not a horrendous movie. It's not a bad film at all. So their kind of remit there was to try and do something different. I think he was told, you have to do something different. Again, it's still carrying on a trend which I find a bit alarming with Marvel, which is taking directors who've only had 1 or 2 films under their belt and throwing them out into a really huge big movie. He'd also done the plenty of TV stuff and TV directing. He did Beef. He was one of the sort of minds behind Beef, which I don't know if you've seen the Netflix show. Beef is a fantastic show, and funny enough, stars Stephen Young, who was originally going to be
the Sentry, right?
Sentry, yeah. And I forget the name of the actress who plays the lead. She's a fantastic comedian who was in Always Be My Maybe with Randall Park.
Okay. Oh, right. Is it Ali Wong?
Ali Wong, yes. Sorry,
yeah,
thank you. Sorry, just machines don't always work as well as they should. And that was a great show. That also dealt with depression, and I found there were elements of that that really spoke to me. And that's about two people who getting involved in a near traffic collision and begin a kind of war against each other that's born out of this anger and depression in their lives, and they begin to kind of, their lives begin to unravel because of this sort of battle between them. But there's some beautiful stuff in that, and I highly recommend it. I think there's another series coming that's going to be about completely different characters. I think it's going to be very much like True Detective or or White Lotus, where you take a similar framework and you just throw different characters into it. I'll certainly be looking forward to that, but that's worth seeking out. So he'd come from that sort of world, and it's interesting that he's managed to carry those themes over.
I mean, and I would say, like you said, it's kind of interesting to see how Marvel, just kind of take these kind of experimental indie directors and, just say, make a Marvel film. It's to various degrees of success. Sometimes it's worked out really fantastic, and sometimes it really hasn't.
One of the things I didn't talk about in our Marvel kind of State of the Marvel U thing that we did back last year was, my hope is that they'll actually start bringing in some more seasoned directors again, because I feel like Marvel movies don't really adhere to a structure very well, and I would like to see a few more seasoned directors and writers come in and try and structure those things a bit more nicely. I don't think it always works to the benefit of them.
Not always, but in cases like this, I think it worked out great, and it, it also worked out great. I mean, James Gunn was looked at as a sort of an indie director.
When
he was given the Guardians franchise, and now he's helming the entire DC movie universe.
But I still kind of long for the days when they had people like Whedon who had a bit more stuff on it. Although I guess he'd only done like one independent film
and mostly TV, But he was, was a seasoned director, of of kind of fantasy,
but also people like Joe Johnston, who did Cap, Kenneth Branagh, Favreau had quite a bit under his belt. So I would kind of like to see more seasoned directors, like, half and half. I think there's a lot of room for both.
I think bringing back the Russos for Doomsday is the smartest thing they could have done.
Yeah. I mean, I've got no idea what to expect with that movie, to be honest with you, at the moment. But I guess we'll know by next year. I thought the teaser scene here was quite like, and I'm talking about the very end one, was kind of very, I don't know. I just like,
really. No, that's oh, come on. That was a really good. I think that was one of the best stingers.
There's a space emergency, and it's just, oh, come on, man. Like, just,
Paul, you're so cynical. No, it was, I'm
not cynical.
No, it's like here come the Fantastic Four.
Yeah. I'm not cynical though. Here's the thing: I am not fucking cynical. I will fight you on this 100%, and I will go down in flames.
Oh, okay. Well,
I am not cynical. I believe in earnestness. I believe in the emotion. I believe in the power of art, and especially this art form, movies, I 100% believe in that. I just want it to be done.
What is there to hate on?
I just want it to be done really well.
It was
because hold on, I'm not finished. We are 30 years into this medium now. It can be done really, really well, and I've seen it done better. This was a really good movie. I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. And overall, very positive about the film and the things it did and said. But
come on, what about that stinger?
It can be done with a little bit more panache.
I don't know. I felt I like left that stinger feeling thrilled and excited.
No, and I'm really glad you did. I'm not taking anything away from your experience of the film, because your experience of the film is still the experience of the film. And also, ultimately, just as with all our interactions, Liz, it's not going to matter what I say. You're not going to listen to it anyway.
Well, what? Okay,
you'll forget what I've said.
Specifically. For that stinger, what was the problem?
I just didn't like the way it was stated. There's a space emergency. Oh, great. Well, that was the dumbest. That is the most kind of terrible leading kind of comment you could have ever made on that. It was just done really badly. And it's interesting that the Russos directed that scene.
I love that scene. I thought it was hilarious. Like, you got it's almost 3 minutes long. It's like, it's got like all the interplay between them. It sets up, they're the Avengers, and it's funny, and it's, loved it.
I don't like what the scene does. Like, I don't mind what the scene does. Yes, the Fantastic Four are coming. Great. That's fine. But it could have been done better.
Avengers with a Z.
I'm not cynical.
Come on.
I'm not cynical. Don't call me cynical. I am not fucking cynical about movies.
All right, but
still the greatest art form ever created, but not necessarily these movies.
Oh my God, Paul!
I think they're done quite. They're very entertaining. I kind of go and see every single one of these as soon as they're out, the day they're out, if I can. And I really had to juggle things around to see this on the day. So. I'm not cynical. There's a difference, but I am kind of expecting of better things from the medium. The medium, not these movies. The medium of film.
All right,
you're conflating the two things.
Okay.
But yeah, overall, I'm very interested to see the FF. I have certain feelings about it now, but I'll wait on that because I want to see it. Next for us, though, Liz, I think we should probably try and talk about this, because Marvel don't seem to be talking about it yet.
Nobody does.
But I think the reason for that is that they were waiting for the latest Empire to come out, which has a big thing in it. And I wonder if they were given an exclusive, and it's just then we'll start fucking trying. And also,
for those of you listening on the podcast, Paul just brought up the logo for the Ironheart TV series,
which actually isn't out for another month, over another month. And I think they'll pour more advertising into that soon. But the general feeling is they just don't give a shit. I don't think that's true. I think they're dealing with the wake of this film, which they've poured a lot of effort into promoting.
Which people love, the overall feeling about this film is that people loved it.
So I mean, we speaking of publicity, we've got to talk about, of course, the end.
Well, yeah, of course, we never talked about the end of the movie, which is, the asterisk, the explanation for it all. And to be honest, I thought a great twist, because in the moment, I did not see that coming.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we kind of did. We talked about it on the prediction.
Well, no. But what I mean is, in the moment that they go to, seemingly confront Val, and like, she sort of chases them through, she had lets them chase her through this curtain. I did not actually see right until then that actually she's brought them onto a stage, after they've saved the day, after they've, stopped the Void from destroying the city of New York. She's actually managed to trick them into becoming her own super team of Avengers. And she introduces them to the world, and the press as the new Avengers. And as much as she sort of saves her own skin by doing it, Elena walks right up to her and whispers in her ear, "We own you now."
Yeah. Also, what's interesting about that is that Marvel have chosen to start rebranding the film in all the advertising as the New Avengers.
Which that particular title, I hadn't been one of my top. Well, it was one of my top guesses, I guess, but I thought it was going to be Secret Avengers, or I didn't. But I thought New Avengers. Actually, that's perfect. That's actually exactly what it should be.
Although you wouldn't be able to publicly introduce a team as the Secret Avengers.
No, you wouldn't. Well, but I didn't necessarily see them publicly introduced to anyone. Totally. I thought that they would be a Secret Avengers team. People were speculating that it would be the Dark Avengers, but nobody's going to call them the Dark Avengers, even if that is actually what they are.
It's the old League of Assassins versus the League of Shadows stuff again. That I think you very succinctly put for me when we were watching Batman Begins one day. Like you said, actually, no, of course because I was like, why can't they call it the League of Assassins? And you were like, well, because how would Bruce Wayne get behind the League of Assassins? He wouldn't.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I'm all for it. I don't know how long it will last. We have, of course, the in-film copyright battle between Sam Wilson and I guess
Bucky, I guess,
Yeah.
Bucky's sort of the de facto leader, I guess. And Sam's not happy about it. Bucky says in that stinger, I mean, because the stinger, what I liked about that too is just that it gave you a lot of information and a lot of context, in a short span of time about what's going on, X amount of time down the road. Essentially we now know that there's like another team of Avengers led by, Sam Wilson, that we're going to contend with in Doomsday.
It's quite interesting because he spent that whole film not wanting to put together an Avengers team,
right?
The film they just did beforehand. I don't know. I'm interested to see where it goes as always, and I'll certainly be there for the FF, and I'll certainly be there for Ironheart. But I'm hoping we'll get together and we'll talk about Ironheart.
Yeah, we didn't get to talk about Daredevil, and I did love Daredevil.
Yes. Two people who did get to talk about Daredevil are Eamon and Nick, our friends from Insider. Their podcast is available on the Comic Crush. I think I've got to update it with the last episode, but that is their podcast on Daredevil, where they cover all of the Daredevil on screen stuff or on TV. I don't think they do the Daredevil movie. With Affleck, which I'm actually upset about because I would like to have heard their take on it. But they cover all of the like Marvel TV, Netflix, MCU Daredevil stuff, including Born Again, and that's a fascinating listen. Like it's a really fun listen.
Yeah.
And you guys should definitely check that out. That's on the Comic Crush. I'll drop a link in the description for it. But yeah, that's it from me. Do check out the Comic Crush shop when you can. There is a ton of really good stuff going in there every week. I'm just about to drop a load more new books in there, and every time you spend money in there, it helps keep me going. It's not cheap for Liz to get these bangs done every couple of weeks.
I know, exactly. You've got to, really.
That is, I mean, look at those. That is not a homemade job. That is, that's a professional.
Right.
That's professional work there.
Yeah,
it's not cheap. So if you could join the Patreon, £2 a month.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, every little bit helps.
Literally, I will send that money to Liz to get those bangs trimmed every couple of weeks.
Yeah, I know they're looking a little long.
Right, guys, thanks for tuning in. Hopefully you've enjoyed this episode as much as at least one of us, Liz or myself, have. Probably Liz. But we'll catch you next time. Follow at the Comic Crush on bsky.social for Blue Sky, at the Comic Crush on Instagram and Threads. We are no longer using our Twitter account, so don't bother following us there. Also, we're on Facebook, and you can get all the information of what's coming up on the Comic Crush first on those socials. So yeah, hopefully you'll subscribe and tune in for the next episode, which will be coming at some point in June for Ironheart. Liz, I hope you'll come back and share your views on that, however inaccurate and blindly loyal to Marvel they may be.
Yeah, well, my views will be, righteous and true as usual.
Yeah, guys, what did you think of Thunderbolts? I do want to know that. So drop us a comment below or on the socials. I'd love to hear what you thought of Thunderbolts. Yeah. See you soon. We're out of here.
Bye.
Bye.